Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
It's Saturday, the 8th of June. I'm Ciara Evans, and this was a week that saw milkshakes and debates in the election campaign, D-Day commemorations in Normandy, election results roll in across the globe, and tributes to a rugby legend.
Grab a cup of something hot, put up your feet, and get up to speed on the 7 biggest stories of the week. This is the Standout 7 from the Smart 7.
It's news,
but not the news.
It was another busy week of general election campaigning with drama in Clacton and a big debate on ITV. Monday saw Rishi Sunak photobombed by a boat full of Lib Dem supporters in Henley, confirmation that Diane Abbott is due to be selected as a Labour candidate after last week's row over a leak, and Grant Shapps phoned Sky News live on air as they revealed new polling. Shapps hurriedly hung up, but the Sky poll suggested that he and many big Tory names, including Jeremy Hunt and Penny Mordaunt, could lose their seats unless the tide turns for the Tories. Meanwhile, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer was busy launching Labour's defence policy, which now includes a so-called triple lock on the use of Britain's nuclear deterrent.
National security is the most important issue of our times, something which, of course, is always true, and which for us will become our solemn responsibility.
It wasn't just a bad day for the Tories, it was also a bad day for Reform UK party leader Richard Tice, who found himself replaced by the honorary president Nigel Farage. Based on polling, Nigel has decided it's time to get his feet wet and stand for the 8th time as NMP, this time in the constituency of Clacton, a town most famous for the rows between mods and rockers in the 1960s.
I've changed my mind. It's not always a sign of weakness. It could potentially be a sign of strength. So I am going to stand in this election in the Essex seaside town of Clacton.
Tuesday night saw Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer head to ITV studios in Salford for the first leaders' debate.
I'm seeking your backing to change our country, to make it work once again for you and your family.
You know what I would do? I'll cut your taxes, protect your pension, and reduce immigration.
It appeared very much headmaster versus maths teacher at times, but Sunak was clearly prepared to fight his corner, and with his party behind in the polls, he needed to make an impact. YouGov polling immediately after the poll suggested that he just shaded the debate by 51% to 49% for Starmer, but exchanges like this, where he got called out on his claims over NHS waiting lists, can't have helped.
They are now coming down.
7.2
yes.
When you said you'd get them down, 7.2 million, they're now 7.5 million. I'd like you to explain how they're coming down.
Because they were coming down from where they were when they were higher.
7.2.
And they're now on their way down. They are down.
Sunak scored well on immigration and pushed hard on his line about Labour raising taxes, even though Starmer repeatedly denied it and accused the Tories of using fantasy figures to create his claim. It was a scrappy affair that seems unlikely to change the course of the election, and the two leaders go head-to-head again on the BBC in 3 weeks' time.
14 years with nothing to do but think about the future, but you have nothing to say about it, and all you can do is talk about the past. And it's clear, there are no big ideas here.
On the one hand, he says these are all the big ideas that Keir Starmer's coming up with, and they'll cost a fortune. Then he says he hasn't got any big ideas. I do appreciate why he doesn't want to talk about the last 14 years. He's ashamed of the last 14 years.
Things didn't go too well for Nigel Farage on his first campaign visit to Clacton-on-Sea, as he was soaked with a bright yellow milkshake as he exited a Wetherspoons in a move reminiscent of the famous 2019 Five Guys shake incident in Newcastle. Nigel's entrance into the election campaign, though, and his demands that the net migration level be set to zero, has sparked a bit of a panic amongst the Tories. They announced a new proposal on Tuesday, which would see a cap on migrant numbers introduced, which would reduce each year. Home Secretary James Cleverly said the government will also set up a new independent body to manage it, to be called the Migrant Advisory Committee.
Immigration levels have been too high. We have taken action to bring them down, and we are committed to continue doing so. In stark contrast with the Labour Party, we need to get a grip of it, we need to bring it down, and we'll do so professionally and properly.
New SNP leader John McSweeney said that the fixation on migration numbers is misguided.
This is a disastrous move from the Prime Minister. Migration is actually one of the most significant contributors towards economic growth. So I think we've got to encourage and welcome people to come here and to fuel economic growth.
Wednesday saw a fierce row break out between Labour and the Tories as it emerged that Rishi Sunak's claims that a Labour government would mean a £2,000 tax rise for most families was based on poor maths. A letter from the Treasury had been circulated 2 days before the debate, warning that officials would not stand over the proposed numbers and that in fact the maths had been done by special advisers. Labour Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth says it's a question of trust in the Tories.
A desperate lie, and Rishi Sunak has exposed himself as no better than Boris Johnson. He's exposed himself as no better and no different. He is desperate and he is lying to the British public.
Starmer did dismiss the claim as absolute garbage on the night and on Wednesday accused Rishi of breaking the ministerial code. The Spectator ran the same maths on the Tory campaign promises and estimated that their plans could cost £3,000 per household in a confusing change of allegiances. Tory Energy Secretary Claire Coutinho was unrepentant, however.
He was asked 12 times in that entire half of the debate. He must have got a frantic text at some point towards the end, but he could not simply say that wouldn't happen. So if anything, it's severely underestimating the cost to families of their policies.
Thursday saw an official pause in election campaigning as a mark of respect for the D-Day commemorations. There was no good news for the Tories, though, as new polling suggests that since Nigel Farage took over the Reform Party, they've seen a significant jump in their support. There was more questions about Tory donors too, as it emerged that Frank Hester has donated a further £5 million to the party. He was at the centre of controversy last year over 2019 remarks about Diane Abbott and inappropriate commentary about staff that saw him face accusations of racism. Work and Pensions Secretary Mel Stride was asked about the donation, which takes the total given by Hester to over £15 million. But Stride says all is forgiven.
We made very clear at the time that Mr Hester's comments were utterly unacceptable. He has shown considerable remorse since he has made those remarks. I'm personally very proud that we live in a society that doesn't tolerate that.
A clip from an ITV interview released on Friday saw Rishi Sunak refuse to back down on his claims over Labour taxes, so the issue seems set to dominate the debate for some time to come.
Yeah, I think it's pretty desperate stuff, and Keir Starmer and Labour Party obviously very rattled that we've exposed their plans to raise tax on people, and that's what it demonstrates.
Thursday marked 80 years since D-Day, with the first commemoration events occurring in Portsmouth and Normandy on Wednesday. Princess Anne was in France to welcome 23 surviving veterans, while the King and Queen hosted a ceremony on South Sea Common, one of the key departure points for the Armada of boats in 1944. The King made his first major speech since his cancer diagnosis before he travelled to Omaha Beach and said that we must never forget their service and sacrifice.
Let us once again commit ourselves always to remember and honour those who served that day and to live up to the freedom they died for.
Prince William read from an extract of a letter from Captain Alistair Bannerman sent to his wife on D-Day. The captain survived the landing and eventually returned home, but the Duke of Cambridge urged us all to remember those who were lost.
Too many never returned. We will always remember those who served and those who waved them off, who watched their loved ones go into battle, unsure if they would ever return. Today we remember the bravery of those who crossed this sea to liberate Europe.
Thursday saw world leaders, with the notable exception of Russia's Vladimir Putin, gathered in Normandy to mark 80 years since 150,000 Allied troops landed in France as part of the effort to defeat Nazi Germany and end World War II. King Charles and Prince William both travelled to France to lay a wreath at the British Normandy Memorial and pay tribute to those who gave their lives that day.
On the beaches of Normandy, in the seas beyond, and in the skies overhead, our armed forces carried out their duty with a humbling sense of resolve and determination, qualities so characteristic of that remarkable wartime generation.
There was a bizarre moment as British paratroopers landing in France as part of the ceremonies had to pose to show their passports to French officials. But overall, the tone was sombre and respectful. US President Joe Biden spoke near the tombs of American servicemen who died on the beaches of Normandy, and he drew parallels with the events of World War II and the modern threats posed by Russia's war on Ukraine.
The Allied forces of D-Day did their duty. Now the question for us is in our hour of trial? Will we do ours? Will we stand for freedom? Will we defend democracy? Will we stand together? My answer is yes, and only can be yes.
Ukrainian President Zelensky has been busy across the last couple of weeks as he made back-to-back trips to Spain, Belgium, Portugal and Sweden to sign new bilateral security agreements with each country. His world tour continued this week as he travelled first to Singapore to participate in the Shangri-La Dialogue Conference on Saturday and then to Manila to meet the Philippine President Bongbong Marcos. Speaking at Saturday's conference, Zelensky reflected on the escalation of the war in Ukraine.
When preventive action was necessary, the aggressor was given time to prepare. Thus, we found ourselves in a war that now affects everyone in the world and spreads a globally dangerous cult.
Zelensky is also hoping to generate more international support for the peace summit he is hosting on the 15th and 16th of June. The summit takes place in Switzerland and over 100 countries have agreed to send representatives. But Russia will not attend and Zelensky says China won't be either. Russia issued a new list of sanctions on Monday targeting UK establishment figures, including journalists and experts who are now banned from entering Russia. They also called on the UK to abandon its support for Ukraine. But the UK's Defence Chief, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, says the UK will continue to support Zelensky's troops as they battle to push back the latest Russian incursion.
I'm hugely confident. We are already past 800 days for a war that Putin anticipated to be 3 days long. And this is tough for Ukraine, but we have to maintain our support.
Ukrainian President Zelensky was a guest at the D-Day commemorations as he continued his tour to build support for the upcoming peace summit in Switzerland. But even as he sought support, Russian President Putin continued to make threats intended to slow or stop the delivery of long-range weapons to Ukraine. Russia's latest incursion towards Kharkiv has seen Ukraine's allies, including the US and Germany, relax their rules on striking Russian targets. But Putin had dire warnings that Russia would be happy to provide weapons that would strike at Ukraine's allies, including the UK.
If it is Storm Shadow, it means that the British are doing it. And in the case of Storm Shadow, it's even simpler. The British do it, so that's it. What should we do in response? First, we will of course improve our air defense systems. We will destroy them.
His remarks didn't seem to trouble US President Joe Biden, who was happy to clarify the new US policy, allowing Ukraine to use American weapons to push back on Russia's forces.
He's concerned me for 40 years. He's not a decent man. He's a dictator. And he's struggling to make sure he holds this country together. We're not talking about giving them weapons to strike Moscow. Just across the border where they're receiving significant fire from conventional weapons used by the Russians.
This year sees a remarkable number of elections around the world, and this week saw results rolling in from some of the biggest ones. The weekend saw history made on Sunday as South Africa's election results started rolling in. For the first time since apartheid ended in 1994, the African National Conference lost its majority, winning just over 40% of the vote. It means the party will need to find coalition partners to reach the 50% threshold and form a government. Opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, finished second with around 22% of the vote. DA leader John Steenhuisen says he's delighted with the outcome.
Our goal for the last 30 years was to bring the ANC below 50%. We've achieved that, and that's good for a democracy. We've ended one-party domination of our politics. A party with 22% of the vote is a big player.
Mexico elected its first female president on Monday, Claudia Sheinbaum, who swept to victory with almost 60% of the vote for her Morena party. She will succeed current President López Obrador, who has vowed to continue his work in modernising Mexico. It was the most bloody election in recent history, with more than 30 candidates killed as the country continues to struggle with drug cartels. Sheinbaum is a Nobel Prize winner, awarded the Peace Prize alongside Al Gore for her work as an environmental scientist, and she was previously the first female mayor of Mexico City.
I am also grateful because, for the first time in 200 years of the Republic, I will become the first woman president of Mexico. Our government will be honest, without inclusiveness, without corruption, without impunity.
Tuesday marked the end of the world's largest democratic election as the results of the Indian general election began to roll in. Polling has been going on for 6 weeks with over 970 million people out of the population of 1.4 billion entitled to vote. It didn't go quite as Prime Minister Narendra Modi had hoped, with some polls predicting he'll win power for a third time in a landslide for his BJP party. But while they did win the most seats, they failed to win a clear majority and will now have to engage in talks with potential coalition partners. He was still happy to declare victory, though.
This is the biggest democracy in the world, and this is the victory of this democracy. And this is on India's constitution, a very big win.
Finally, the European Parliament elections take place this weekend across Europe as 27 nations go to the polls to elect 720 new representatives. The results won't be known until Monday, but polling suggests that the Parliament may see a shift to the right as the war in Ukraine and an immigration crisis impacts politics across the European bloc. On the eve of voting, Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico, who was dramatically shot just 3 weeks ago, made an unexpected appearance on video. He says he's on the road to recovery and he's forgiven the shooter, but laid the blame of the incident on Slovakia's Liberal opposition party, who have repeatedly denied any involvement with what appeared to be an isolated incident.
It's time to take the first step, which is forgiveness. I feel no hatred towards the stranger that shot me. I forgive him and let him sort out what he did and why he did it in his own head.
Still to come on the Standout 7, the UN takes a strong position on fossil fuels and tributes to a rugby legend.
Right after this. Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Welcome back.
One of the loudest voices on climate change in recent years has been the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. He's made a series of speeches, including one at last year's General Assembly, warning that humanity has opened the gates to hell as global warming continues to accelerate and major countries drag their feet on climate action. He took things up a notch on Wednesday with a speech at the American Museum of Natural History as he warned that new climate data says there's now an 80% chance that the planet will miss the 1.5 degree target across at least one of the next 5 years. He focused on fossil fuel companies asking governments to begin banning fossil fuel advertising, and he also had a direct plea to ad agencies and marketing companies.
I call on these companies to stop acting as enablers of planetary destruction. Stop taking on new fossil fuel clients from today and set out plans to drop your existing ones. Fossil fuels are not only poisoning our planet, they are toxic for your brands.
There is so much TV these days, it's easy to miss great shows, and you might have missed Sandra Oh's new show, which dropped on Sky Atlantic last month. It's called The Sympathizer, and it stars Sandra alongside Robert Downey Jr. in a sort of spy thriller set during the Vietnam War. That's not all she's been up to, though. She's also busy starring in an off-Broadway show called The Welkin, which features a huge cast with 16 different actors on stage. In fact, it's got so many actors it qualified for a highly unusual funding arrangement, as she told Seth Meyers.
There's a monk who won a lottery.
Yep.
And with this, I'm not joking, with this money, he supports theater, but particularly for large casts. So we got some funding because our cast is so large that this monk who won the lottery helps fund this show, helps fund The Welkin.
There's some very sad news in the sports world as it was announced on Saturday that Leeds Rhinos legend and M&D advocate Rob Burrow passed away at the age of 41. Born in Pontefract, Wakefield in 1982, he began playing junior rugby league with the Featherstone Lions as a child. In 2001, he made his Leeds Rhinos debut and remained at the club for his entire 16-year professional career, winning every honour as part of their golden generation. He also made a combined 18 appearances for England and GB be throughout his career. But it was off the pitch that he made his biggest impact. Diagnosed with motor neuron disease in 2019, Rob dedicated his remaining years to advocating for those with MND and raising millions for charity. Here he is accepting the BBC Sports Personality of the Year Helen Rollison Award in 2022. Rest in peace, Rob.
I am inspired to keep going by my friend Kevin Sinfield, my family as a whole, who have put their life on hold to care for me, especially my beautiful wife Lindsay and my amazing kids. I'm not here without a sacrifice. This is for all the MND warriors out. We will not stop. We've found the cure. Thanks for your help.
You've been listening to The Smart 7. We'll be back tomorrow at 7 a.m. Hit that follow button and have a great day. Give us 7 minutes and we'll give you the world.
Why don't more infant formula companies use organic, grass-fed whole milk instead of skim? Why don't more infant formula companies use the latest breast milk science? Why don't more infant formula companies run their own clinical trials? Why don't more infant formula companies use more of the proteins found in breast milk? Why don't more infant formula companies have their own factories instead of outsourcing their manufacturing? We wondered the same thing. So we made ByHeart, a better formula for formula. Learn more at byheart.com.